Welcome to our 83rd podcast. Today we'll be talking about how the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, can help workplace culture with our special guest, Rachel Shaw. What's one thing you can do now to improve your disability accommodation program? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back to our podcast. We're so happy to have you here with us. I am joined today by Ben Kleinman, as always, our co-host. Hey,
Hi, everyone.
And then we have a special guest today. We have Rachel Shaw of Shaw Consulting, right? And Shaw HR Consulting, right? And Rachel, we're so glad to have you here from California.
Yay.
A little sunshine here in the cloudy Chicago area. So thanks for joining us today.
Great to join you, but I hate to disappoint you. We've had our first day of rain ever in October. I don't remember. It's been pouring 2 inches, so maybe it's your fault. But it is not sunny outside.
It's the curse.
But it will be in a couple days. So we got you.
Well, that's okay. Send it over this way. We need that over here. Great. So, Rachel, just a little bit from your bio here, right? You are one of the nation's leading experts in disability compliance and inclusion. And as the president of Rachel Shaw Inc. and Shaw HR Consulting, you help organizations identify their unique disability program needs, and then you build the strategies, training, and customized programs to meet and often exceed their compliance and inclusion goals. So can you tell us, how did you get into this? How did you get into doing this? Like, what's your why? We like to start with that.
Well, how I got into it is like how most, I think, HR people get into their job or their job duties. It was part of my job description, the illustrious other duties as assigned. I was a brand new HR person, not old enough to even know what ADA was. So ADA was passed in 1990. I started doing this work in 1998. Very few people knew what it was. So let's give it to the brand new HR person who's never done anything important in HR before. And so I was given something, and as many people who are, interested in wanting to succeed in their job, I started trying to figure it out. And there was no procedures out there. There was attorneys who said, don't screw up, you'll get in trouble. But there just really wasn't practices. And so I started in 1998 trying to figure out how to do it. I started creating programs. I worked with some consultants to help me bridge the gap of knowledge, because there was legal cases, but there wasn't practical tools for HR professionals to know, how do you do it well, and how do you do it so it doesn't impact relationships along the way. And then, kind of the rest is history. I started doing it as a consultant with another company. And 15 years ago, I started my own. And I'm sort of, I always say, I'm sort of the best known, but it may be because there's so few of us. I am very humble, if nothing else. But, I travel around the United States helping employers try to figure out how to do this right, but also, not just from a compliance model, but also a human-centric model. So I love it. It's a great fit for who I am. And I appreciate every day that I stumbled into it as a 24-year-old HR professional who thought ADA was average daily attendance. I'm not going to lie, I did.
And that would have been so much easier for Rich to say, by the way.
Yes. There you
go. And so all of this has turned into you doing speaking and training and all this across,
and a book.
They say the riches are in the niches, right? But you've really carved out a really interesting niche here. So
yeah. it is very it's very niche, and it's a great fit for who I think I am as a human, which was just a happy coincidence. I am very mission driven. I have a very strong moral center, and I'm brave when it comes to fire me if you don't want to do the right thing, kind of. And I think that fits really well in this area. And so consulting's worked great because there's less risk if one client's unhappy as opposed to your bosses. So I
That's
was I
true.
was grateful all along the way in terms of my career trajectory, but it was all just happenstance. I mean, there was no great plan. I think I got lucky, and I also care deeply about the work, which helps.
Sure.
Well, you clearly saw an opportunity as you were building these things out. You saw a fit for yourself. You saw this is an area that I enjoy, that I seem to be good at, and that there's really not a lot out there, and I can make a difference. And so, sort of hear you talking about all these things that you were working with initially, just learning and maybe talking to some other consultants, and you've built up this robust body of knowledge, if you will, and you have a whole process that you've developed and practical tools, like you say. So you've sort of um, taken all of that and built something out of it that then other people can use as a really good platform to stand on. And it I think maybe demystifies so many of these things for other people who are either coming into it as fresh new HR hires like you were, or as seasoned folks who just maybe haven't had the need or the opportunity to focus on some of these issues throughout their career. And so I think that's fantastic, and it's truly a credit. Really, really
Thank you.
impressive.
Thank you. I think, we kind of all do this in our consulting space. You guys do it as well with all of your change management. Who's harmed when someone who cares deeply in an organization has to learn something or do it for the first time? Who's
Oh,
harmed,
yeah,
right?
sure.
The culture, the employees. And so what I did is I realized it was really hard. And I'm sure the first 5, maybe even 10 years I did this, there's a lot of people with disabilities and who needed support who were probably not best supported by me, even though I was doing my best because I was figuring it out. And when you figure things out, you're going to make mistakes. I mean, how do you learn in HR? It's not the PhD, it's the trial and error, right? And so to be able to now know, I know how to do it, and I know how to do it well, to be able to go into an organization and just increase their learning curve, right? You're not only going to help them get to compliance so much quicker, but all those employees who would have suffered through really well-intentioned people, the trial and error phase, it's why you bring in a third party, right? And then you've got to make sure that you leave your knowledge behind, right? So that's what's important. We're not just, let me help you fix it, but we're going to hold the tools. No, we give that so that they can then do it. And I'm often running on the next organization because I want you to be self-sufficient to do, to manage this within your own culture, and then I'm off working with the next
Hmm.
organization. So
Sure.
it's really great,
Yeah.
and I do think it adds, my goal is I want to add value. I think making widgets can be great, but I'm grateful that I'm making opportunities and creating, generational opportunities for people.
I
Mm,
like that, making
fantastic.
opportunities. That's really
Yeah.
nice. It
I
seems the
remember.
Oh,
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead, Rich.
No, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I was
Sorry.
just gonna say that I like the idea of this idea of empowering your clients. And sometimes we often talk about working ourselves out of a job, and I think that's sort of the same concept, if I'm understanding right, that you're trying to work yourself out of that particular consulting engagement, and maybe they'll bring you back to take on another more challenging assignment, or they'll bring you back to do something else, or help a new group of people get trained. But for that particular situation, I love that you're not just fixing it, but you're also empowering your clients and stakeholders to really own it and do it in a way that's not just sort of ticking the box, but helping them see that there's a moral and ethical way to do this, that's sort of doing the right thing. And that's just, yeah, that's cool. And that's different sometimes from some of the consultants that you see out there that are just like, yep, we'll come in, we'll fix this, and then bring us back next time this comes up in a year, because processes always have to change, or workforce people change,
Yeah,
things like that.
Sure.
yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Rachel, let me ask something. Go because you've mentioned culture a few times here. And Ben, to what you were just saying, right? Culture is supposed to have some permanence, right? If you're working yourself out of a job, right? And then how do you make sure that everything sticks and remains part of this positive um, environment?
Yeah. Well, you have to have strong process. And so here's what I want to say kind of because I mean, when you think of accommodations in the workplace, I don't know what your experience, Ben is or Rich, but when you think of it, a lot of folks who don't live in an organization where there's high accommodation or leave needs, they may
Right.
be kind of confused, right? They might think, well, a wheelchair, right? Or, maybe some mobility support. And so there are industries and there are companies that don't need me, never will. I wouldn't ever go in there because their culture is you need something, you got it, right? A person with a disability, whether it's an invisible disability, psychological leave, or a physical limitation, goes to their employer, their supervisor, and says, I need help. And the employer's like, let's do it. That is great. That is perfect. You don't need me or my process.
Makes
Um,
sense.
you know, there are organizations, however, where there are either what do you the dark triad that
Oh, yes.
Cheryl and you guys talk
Cheryl's
about,
dark
right?
triad. Yes.
Right, where you might have an organization where leadership or management sees someone or finds out someone has a disability, and they're concerned that that's going to impact the product, or that other people are going to have to work harder, or that's going to impact customer experience, or it's going to cost their insurance more. And so sometimes you have cultures where employers, whether it's known or unknown bias, they actually do not prefer to accommodate, hire, or retain someone with a disability impacting
Mm,
them in the workplace or leave. And sometimes you have industries where the industry is physical. And imagine if you were trying to ride a bus and this employer had bus operators who couldn't drive. That would be a problem for you, using that service.
sure.
So, in terms of culture, where I often come in, it's where, you know, the organization either can't say yes all the time, or there is an implicit bias or a belief in the organization or amongst some or all supervisors, where there's a desire to hire and retain what they perceive to be easier to manage or better for the workplace, right? And so what happens in that is that oftentimes, whether it's intentional or not, employees who have a need for accommodation have to they have to ask for it. So they have to disclose a disability that they may or may not have, the employer may not be aware of.
Sure.
And oftentimes the power differential in that organization is, without good process, we allow. So I'll give you an example. Let's say a custodian has either a work injury or a personal condition where the doctor's indicated no heavy lifting.
Sure.
In the organizations I work in, imagine if you're the custodian and this is what puts a roof over your head, food in your belly, and allows you to have your kids go to college or whatever it is, right? And you're walking into your employer and saying, I need this job, but I can't do heavy lifting anymore.
Sure.
Cultures who are like, no problem, let's make it work. Keep doing that.
Hmm.
But if you have a culture where the management is thinking, no, we can't accommodate, what they basically are doing is telling the employee, look, I know better, I have the power, and I'm going to say no because I'm afraid you're going to get hurt or you're not going to do your full job. That creates a very negative culture for the employee, because the employer may or may
Sure.
not be right.
Right.
What it also can do is it impacts others looking at that employee. Well, you know, a lot of employees are going to have either their family or they're going to have a medical need for leave or accommodation at some point in their career if they stay around long enough. And they're looking, how will I be treated? Will I be given fair? And so what I do is I go into organizations and I first need to audit, like, where are you in the spectrum of your process need? But most organizations that hire me, they need to equalize that power difference with process. So you
Hmm.
institute clear process. What does that look like? I use a 4-step process. There's forms, there's letters, there's scripts. We're training HR professionals, even if they use a third party, like maybe a third party leave manager. That's fine, but the relationship you have with your employees. And I hate to bring this up because I know you're hoping for one episode where you don't say it, but AI can't take that over, right? So AI is going to have to they're going to do a lot of great things, but what it can't do is it can't replace the relationship that your HR team has to have with your employees.
That's right.
And so I train and I give them process and the tools so that when there's turnover, that knowledge doesn't leave with that person's brain, but they have flowcharts and forms and samples and processes and procedures. And if they want to do additional training, of course, that's there. But you have to really, you have to concrete over your process, make it very clear so that there's a set of rules and expectations. So your organization knows I'm going to be treated consistently. I'm going
Hmm.
to be given an opportunity to explain and to clarify.
Hmm.
We're going to equalize the power difference between what the employer thinks heavy is and what the employee thinks heavy is by getting the healthcare provider to clarify. And we're going to use data to make decisions, not opinion, preference, or bias. That will change your culture because people will feel safe.
I love that. I want to come back to, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about how you lead with data, because I would have thought there are laws, right? There's like literally ADA is an act that you're supposed to follow. How is it that we're
It's a
not
tough
even
act to
leading
follow.
with that? Yeah, but I wish I had my drum set over here, Ben. Boom, boom. Okay, but can we come back to that when we come back from the break? Awesome. We'll be right back. At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how harmonious workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So we're here with Rachel Shaw. And Rachel, before we went to the break, you mentioned leading with data, right? And how much more data can you get than like a law that says you should accommodate and you need to do certain things, right? Um, can you go a little deeper into that and tell us like some real world examples?
Absolutely. So the law requires an employer provide reasonable accommodation, which basically
Mhm.
means the employee can do their job fully and safely with some sort of modification tool, et cetera.
Sure.
And so the problem with most interactive processes is healthcare providers are not ADA experts. They're practitioners. So you're getting things like no heavy lifting, no forceful pushing and pulling, no prolonged sitting, no prolonged walking, or work from home, or must work, a 410 schedule. So you're getting data that is really, and this is a very technical HR term. So for those of you out there, I'll explain it. You're getting crappy data, right?
Very
And
technical. Thank you
very
for sharing
technical.
that. Can
Yes,
you give
I
us a
know.
definition?
We are all about the education here at Harmonious Workplaces podcast. So you just get garbage, and when you have bad data or crappy data, what
Mhm.
happens is employers think they know, especially supervisors, and this is not because people are bad. I am not. I believe good people sometimes don't understand their power difference. And so they think they know what heavy, forceful, repetitive, or if work from home is legit. And they will make decisions on that. And what the interactive process obligation under the ADA requires of us is for the employer and specifically HR to say, okay, what does heavy mean? Again, going to be curiosity, understanding that you don't know what it means. And so when we ask, let's say we go back and we use one of my standard questionnaires, which clients can get, or they can email me, I'll send it to them for free. But you send this questionnaire that we've developed and used hundreds of thousands of times across the United States for the last 15 years. And doctors or healthcare providers can explain, maybe that person has a no lifting more than 5 pounds with their right arm, which is where their injury is. Maybe their left arm is unrestricted in lifting. And when they're lifting using both of their arms, or hands, they can lift 50 pounds. Now, that supervisor or manager was probably going to say no because heavy worried them or made them think the employee would get
Mm.
hurt more or not do their job. But the job description says 50 pounds of lifting in my scenario, and what happens very often for custodians. We just found a yes. We use data so that instead of going into a meeting where HR is trying to convince either the employee that it's a no, or HR is trying to convince the manager it's a yes. And again, we don't have often I always say HR is the most powerful person in the organization, but we're invisible. And if we do our job well, people think we're nothing but cookie providers, right? That is, we're sort of the Oz behind the screen. And so we're going in there with data and we're
Right
going to
on.
get you to make the right decision. So we walk in with a job description that says 50 pounds. Oh, look what we found. The doctor clarified or the healthcare provider clarified they can lift 50 pounds using both hands. We just found a yes. And so data is what changes everything. Otherwise, we're just arguing. We're just negotiating based on power. And that's the problem with, I think, employers when they're struggling, when they're seeing litigation or anger, or employees who feel disenfranchised, or there's unions who are appropriately representing, or attorneys who are appropriately representing their members or clients. When we see that noise, that pain, that is really, I mean, conflict, it's usually what I walk in. Usually what I find is you're using crappy data because you as an employer are forgetting that that's a power differential. That's actually, that's something we have to sort of solve for. Once you solve and you get good data, same thing with work from home. I mean, we have a lot of, as you see, return to office kind of becoming the new reality for a lot of employers who were fully remote or mostly remote post pandemic, right? As we're seeing these organizations returning their employees to the workplace, we're getting a lot of remote work, medical related accommodations, and employers have feelings about that. And so
Mhm.
what I say is feel your feelings, or eat them or drink them, whatever you do, and then stop, get into what I call the disability interactive process hallway. It's a 4-step process. First step is gather data, and let the data guide you instead of your emotions, your fear, your thoughts, your feelings. And that's the best part of the law, is the interactive process obligation.
I do have a question about that, just because I have a little bit of experience in construction, and I used to own a sign company, so we used to do ADA signage, right? So there are certain things that some employers, especially those who either own a facility or rent a facility, they have to provide. Again, like there's signs, but there's also ramps and those types of things that can lead to expense, and of course nobody wants that. How do you tackle those types of objections that might happen? Or do you even come up with any of those objections in your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I do Title One, which is mainly removing physical barriers and workplace barriers for people to work. So where that comes up is an employer who, let's say they have an employee who does have a mobility issue and it's an old building, and that employer
Right.
needs to put in a ramp or extend a bathroom stall. And or let's say they hire someone who needs an ASL interpreter who's deaf, right, and
Sure.
utilizes that language. It's very expensive, and employers are like, how do I do this? But I will say, do you guys know what the average cost of a workplace ADA accommodation is for an employer? The average cost
I have
to
no
accommodate a
idea.
disabled person, it's under $300. And in
What?
my experience, it's usually zero. It is so rare. I had a teacher,
Wow.
a second grade elementary teacher, who woke up in the hospital after Christmas break or Thanksgiving, or a holiday break, with no arms and no legs from sepsis. She went
Oh,
back to work and it cost her employer $67. They bought her a rolling cart she could utilize with her wheelchair and her one prosthetic arm. They assumed it would cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there are rare examples like ASL interpreters, potentially if you have to change facilities that are expensive. But 99.99% of every accommodation I've managed for my 26-year career has been either $0 or under 300. Now, Title II of the ADA is what you're talking about. It is where
mhm.
employers, new buildings, renters, and that's where I think you can see some of that. You have a company that goes in and they're a mom and pop, and they're hit with a lawsuit where someone said they were denied a accessible restroom. I don't do that work, but I know it can be
Sure.
very difficult. But the idea is at some point, and I mean, this law was passed in 1990. And the fact that we still don't have buildings and facilities and everything that allows someone with a disability to just get to work or buy groceries, you know.
We're
Now
we're,
I will
lit
say,
we're literally grading some companies on Google whether or not they have, these types of accesses. So it's like ramps or whatever. So yeah,
And
it's
we're
I mean, there
lucky
are
in
also,
the US. I mean, if
right.
you've been to
I was going to
Europe
say,
or if you've been to parts of
yes.
Asia, we are
I was going to say,
light
I
years.
can't travel because of my profession. Every vacation I've been on outside of the United States, my family is like, Mom, it's enough. Because I walk around saying like, you can't be disabled. This city is not, I mean, talk about unaccessible cities. Some of the European cities we all like to go to in the spring, man, there is no accessibility. So it's not perfect. But I will also share with you, there are some bad actors in the employment side, and there are some bad actors in the public space side where,
Sure.
there's attorneys who walk around and throw 50 lawsuits down on restrooms with no need for a restroom access. And so there's always bad actors that sort of, I think, cause some people to be very frustrated. It is rarer. But I understand it. I understand it can be expensive. And ultimately, on the employment side, if something truly is going to break the bank, an employer can say no. But it's so rare. There's so many opportunities to find common sense solutions, often, very often with data.
And I like that you were saying with data, but also with a curious mindset, and that seems to be something that resonates a lot with stuff that we've talked about on our podcast a lot before.
Sure.
Is just having that, not necessarily biased towards no or biased towards the status quo, but how can we get to some sort of yes, or how can we
Yeah,
change this in a way that's comfortable, or how can we get there that still allows us to be part of our why without
that's right.
kind of changing that. um,
So right.
yeah.
I train employers, HR professionals especially. Um, if you're starting with how do we prove it's no, you've already failed. You have to
Mm.
start with it's a yes. There's a yes. If there's a yes in the universe, we're going to find it. So what I say is, under the law, you have to be in good faith. And I train HR professionals on good faith is essentially we're going to do the work to gather the data to seek out a yes if a yes exists. And by golly, if we find a yes, we're going to make sure our employer implements it. But the premise is that there is an accommodation. You might find that you're wrong. But the power and the respect you earn by trying to find that yes and finding you're wrong versus what so many employers do oftentimes without even knowing they're doing it, is starting with it's a no, but let me do the work to prove it's a no. So if we get sued, we win. That is absolutely that is not the goal. And I get that your supervisors or managers, some of them may have that premise. Your boss, the owner of the company may even be coming in with a no. But HR, our job is to make sure that we protect the organization. And that's by making sure that we're doing the right process, procedures, and we're understanding how to do the work in a way that's going to protect us and also create understanding and acceptance of a decision if we have to say no. Because you're not just telling someone I'm not giving you an apple pie. You're firing a disabled person,
Mm.
potentially, and that could have ripple effects on most American workers who have physical jobs are 1 to 2 paychecks away from being homeless. Like this is a big deal, and I think HR needs to understand that and appreciate how important they are. And again, it's a mindset. I'm starting with a premise that there's a yes. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm not sure I'm going to find it, but gosh darn it, I'm going to do the work to
Right
gather the
on.
data to seek out a yes.
And
That sounds
keeping the
good.
person, I like that you say that the keeping the person essentially first and foremost, as
Yeah,
opposed to letting a bias or just a procedure get in the way of that person and their job.
yeah.
Yeah. Rich, I know you probably want to jump to a break, so maybe when we come back, Rachel, you've talked a couple of times about power and power differentials. I'm wondering if maybe that's a topic we could explore, if you guys are open to that.
Totally. Another thing I would like as kind of related to that is how you might, because we're all about change here, right? I mean, you know that. So how do you work with organizations, these power differentials, and how do you make all of this change, not just with the HR people, but the executives and then the workers themselves, and how people become enculturated to all of this.
Perfect.
Okay, we'll be right back.
In a world where leadership needs clarity and action, and HR gets left out of the loop, one hermit crab steps in to save the day, only to be shut down by management. From the creators of Hermie the HR Hermit Crab and the Harmonious Workplaces podcast comes a new shell-shocking adventure, Out of the Loop Into the Fire, or HR Hung Out to Dry. This book blends workplace satire with evidence-based lessons, reminding leaders that culture, trust, and people strategy don't exist as extras. They form the foundation of lasting success. Whether you work as an HR professional, a leader, or just someone who has survived a few too many staff meetings, Hermes stories will make you laugh, think, and maybe even change the way you see your workplace. Purchase Hermie the HR Hermit Crab, Out of the Loop, Into the Fire, or HR Hung Out to Dry Now available on Amazon and Ingram Spark. Shop now at harmoniousworkplaces.com/HermieHRCrab. That's harmoniousworkplaces.com/HermieHRCrab.
Huh, they changed her Fred.
And we're back. So, Rachel, thanks again for being on this show. I mean, we've learned so much here. You've given, I mean, it's just been a fire hose of information on ADA. And
ADA masterclass. It's been
yeah,
great.
absolutely. Um, so, but before we went to the break, Ben, you were talking about power. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
power. Well,
Tee that
just
up.
Rachel, you've kind of mentioned a few times now power differentials, and really curious to explore that a little bit in terms of how you're seeing that, where you're seeing that. Is it mostly the employer having the power, sometimes the person who's potentially getting fired having power because they could bring a really damaging lawsuit? How you kind of navigate that when you walk into a situation that might be somewhat tense or frayed already. And then, Rich, you were also talking about how to get those things, all of these things, tools, processes, mindsets, ethical principles embedded into a culture that
Right.
might be having so many other changes going on at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go. I know it's like 800,000
I got it.
things, Rachel. I'm
I got
sorry.
it.
However you want to sort of digest.
Yeah. So the power differential is, look, employers often don't feel powerful, especially frontline managers and supervisors. But the reality is they have all the power because they get to decide, hire, fire, evaluate. They get to make choices, and the owners of companies get to make decisions on policies, procedures, changes. So that's where the power is held. And what I always tell employers is, you have that. Of course, you have that power. You're ultimately determining what you're selling, what service you're providing, what your customer experience needs to be. You of course have that. But when it comes to things where we need to make sure that we're not making, when it comes to compliance, when we're making sure that we're not doing something that could be illegal or harmful for the organization, we need to understand that that power differential can often be harmful. And that isn't, so my primary example is where oftentimes employers feel very comfortable defining unclear or crappy restrictions, and that is them showing their power. And so, look, change happens. Employers are going to have to make change. And what I will often say is, I get, I often get in my arena in disability compliance, I often get a failed change implementation,
Mm.
which is why oftentimes when people call me, especially right now, because again, depending on what industry you're in, this may not be touching you, it may be a surprise, but return to office procedures are a big deal. I mean, you have companies, that have been fully remote even before COVID. Some companies that were completely remote and employees moved all over the country, and now they're being told you move back or you get fired. And so when an employer doesn't manage change, which they have the right to make that decision, right? You can decide how you want your operations done in an office, in a cubicle, with six people on their headphones, no one talking, but you're in an office, or, you have the right to decide how you do that. The problem is, and you know this because this is your life, when you don't manage change, you don't communicate why. You don't communicate that we get that this might be not desirable for you, but here's why it's important to our culture, our customer experience, whatever. When you don't manage, communicate, and implement change in a thoughtful way, especially with return to office, what I'm seeing is employers who have 700 to 2,000 requests to work from home from a medical note. Because I mean, you want to work from home? I'll show you the doctor. You can pay $65 and they'll say you need to work remote. I mean, you can get a note anywhere giving you whatever accommodation. The problem is there are people that legitimately need to work fully remote, legitimately need it, can do their full job. There's a medical need. COVID made it a reality. It's changed their whole life. But
Sure.
there are probably, I don't know, but probably some employees who are asking to work fully remote because of a mental or physical limitation that may or may not be accurate. And so when you don't manage change and you don't understand how to thoughtfully implement the power that employers have to dictate how the service or the product is being produced or delivered, if you don't manage that, sometimes we see that impacting, what employees will do to try to then use their limited power, which is compliance, laws, rights, to then get what they want, but they couldn't get by asking, or doesn't exist anymore because there was a policy change. So a lot of times right now, when someone is calling me and wants to hire me, and they're anticipating a lot of accommodation requests regarding the remote work or the hybrid changes, the first thing I say is, call a change consultant, call the Harmonious Workplaces guys, call someone to help you manage it. So,
Mhm.
and then help me come in and create process, communicate process, so employees know the rules. Because when they know the rules, some people might self-select out of asking for something if they don't medically need it.
Sure. And you mentioned you have a four-step process here. So you said collecting data.
Yeah.
What are those other components, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. So quickly, is under the law, there's three ways an employer gets triggered to start the process:
Sure.
request, perception of disability, or knowledge. When that happens, they're making sure we're in the right spot. And if we
Sure.
are, first step is data gathering. Second step is communicating the data to make sure all parties understand what was collected, and starting to research accommodation ideas. And this means, Googling AI, using you know, generate AI, trying to figure out a yes that doesn't exist in our brain, but might exist in the universe that we don't
Mhm.
know. That's step two. Step three is scheduling and holding an interactive process meeting where the parties talk, explore, share their thoughts, ideas, concerns. It's an interactive discussion, and it allows the employee or the applicant and the employer to look at each other, because we are more honest when we are looking at each other from an employer's perspective.
Sure.
And then the fourth step is implementing the decision: the yes, the no, the maybe, implementing and making sure HR is shepherding the process to closure. Because oftentimes we make a decision and we leave it to the supervisor to implement, and it doesn't get implemented, and all that good work goes to the garbage. So that employee knows. I use a hallway protocol, the idea of you get into a foyer, you go to four doors or four steps with meetings and decisions at the end. And the idea of that is HR's job is to shepherd employees through a process, the interactive process, to get to a decision point we hope is a yes, but it could be a no, so that
Mhm.
we are creating understanding and acceptance. If there's a yes, we're moving forward and we feel good about that accommodation. And if it's a no, we want to use a process to try to increase the likelihood that an employee or applicant will understand and accept the no, which lowers anger, which lowers litigation, which lowers all the other negative things that can happen in a workplace when an employee feels harmed, not listened to, and or when the employee feels the employer's made the wrong decision. So the process is intentional for the four steps, and to build in some time, and to build in education and knowledge.
So you've got, just so I get this right, so data collection, data communication, then then the meeting to talk about all this, and then decision made implementation.
Correct.
That's your elegant. I like it. That's great. Ben.
Professor, can I jump in? One question, Rachel. I'm curious if you find that most of the HR folks that you work with are comfortable going into this role or working with you in this way, or do you find that some HR folks are um, a little hesitant because it's maybe outside of their comfort zone, or because there's that dangling threat of a lawsuit, they get very skittish and they almost start to get a little bit removed from that, they either self-remove or they defer to legal, or how have you found that interaction with the HR people who are you've just said they're meant to carry this whole process through and help get the organization to some kind of outcome that is hopefully palatable for everyone.
Yeah. So usually, if HR folks are doing this work, and I come in, it's usually something that is um, very difficult, and they are not enjoying. They understand the importance, but they are it kind of is one of the most miserable parts of their job, because lots of conflict, hard conversations. And so when I come in, they're so grateful and they want the support. Now, some will want me to just can I just outsource this and give it to you? And so, in California, we do have a company that will support, but we only will let them outsource files if they're learning and growing, and we only take after training, we only take 10% of their files, because you have to do this in-house. What I do when I'm traveling around is I don't outsource. So they have to be committed to understanding that, number one, there is a way to do it that will reduce. I mean, I have I used to facilitate or manage 400 interactive process meetings and interactive process hallways a year myself. And I didn't have conflict and anger. I would often get hugs pre-COVID, right? Thank yous, and because it really matters how you do it. So
Mhm.
I have to convince these folks who normally HR people care really deeply. They're very mission driven. Usually folks that do this type of work, it's not really, they're class and comp or or maybe labor relations or grievances or things. But in this type of work, usually someone that gets put in here is typically a good communicator and someone who cares about people. So this work is really emotionally hard for them, and when I show them how do you not just suffer through it, but make the experience better for everyone. You find more yeses, you create understanding when it's a no. Employees trust you. It really becomes a very positive experience. And so what I tend to get is, they call it the Church of Rachel, right? I tend to get it non-religious, we're non-denominational, but like people who love the work so much, they want to then not only, do it within their organization, but they're like, how do I do this and create a bigger impact? Because it works. And, I've been doing this for 15 years, every single day of my life. I don't do other things. And so I've had a lot of practice. I've done it very poorly. I've done it a little bit better. And then now I know how to do it and communicate it. So I find that when organizations bring me in, it's usually an issue of they don't know who I am or what I do because they didn't know this existed. And then when I do come in, you create people who just they implement the process, they practice, they get more comfortable, and then they find that they actually love this because they are actually removing unnecessary barriers to create a more equitable and inclusive workplace, which creates more profitable workplaces and creates more inclusion. And they're creating fairness in an organization that often doesn't feel like people with difference get an equal or fair shake. And it's powerful and people love it because you get to feel important, and you are,
Sure.
but you don't often feel important, when you're doing this work.
There you go,
Awesome.
Rich. That's how it changes the culture.
That's great.
It's about
And
building trust and making people see that it can become something better and different, and people see the ripples of that throughout the organization.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And they have a kindred spirit. I mean, somebody who's actually coming from the HR space, and now has put in the proverbial 10,000 hours of mastery to
Yeah.
you know be able to demonstrate this. So the effectiveness of this. Um,
I do the same as you guys. I mean, why do people bring us in? Because we've walked in their shoes. We get it. We,
sure.
and so that's the difference. There's lots of folks out there training. And again, no, I don't begrudge. There's enough space in this industry. There's almost no competition because there just isn't a lot of folks that have done this path. But if you haven't done the work, if you haven't sat across from an employee telling you that they're going to be homeless tomorrow if you take their job away and they're crying with their 3-year-old, right? If you haven't lived that, if you haven't lived in a meeting where someone brought 7 attorneys threatening to take your home as an HR professional, calling you every name of the books, if you haven't lived that experience, it's really hard for HR professionals to trust that what you're saying is real. Because
Mhm.
if it's all conceptual, if you haven't actually lived through the reality and why it's so hard to look someone in the eye and saying, look, I'm not saying you don't have a disability. I've noticed you're only calling out sick on Fridays, unless Friday's a holiday, and then you're calling out on Thursdays. So explain it to me. Like if you haven't lived that experience, it's really hard for someone to trust that you're going to help shepherd them through and get them through what is often a very scary, untrained, and litigious part of their job. So
Yeah,
you gotta walk the walk. That's my belief.
Yeah,
for
hard
sure.
conversations.
Yeah,
Rich, I'm so sorry.
you
What's the
go.
what's the funniest thing that someone has ever called you in a meeting?
Well, it hasn't happened in a meeting, but I can tell you many, many times when I've challenged. So chiropractors are only supposed to treat basically dislocated spines that are evidenced by an X-ray. And chiropractors sometimes, again, I love chiropractors, but sometimes chiropractors will provide like work from home, or employer needs to give someone an office or whatever. And so my favorite thing is like a couple times I've written a questionnaire to a chiropractor just saying, hey, are you licensed in this state to be able to comment on something other than the spine? If so, what is your license number? And I often get like a response back, where did you go to medical school? Or, what's your degree in? But, I have been called lots of names that I can't say on radio. Well, I don't know. Maybe I can.
Well, this is not the Howard Stern show, so maybe
Right.
we
That's
won't
true. Yeah.
allow.
But
But
you
yeah,
can
that's why I was
imagine.
asking about the funniest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the funny, I mean, I will say probably, I've been called mother before by someone. So thank you, mother. And
Right on.
that was when I was in my 20s and I was more offended. Now that I'm a mother of grown up people, But
Right on.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, we're just about at that time now. Rachel, how can somebody get in touch with you? Do you have any parting words for our audience today?
yeah, my parting words is just, if you're in this space, it's important work. You're not alone. There's free resources on my website, rachelshaw.com. There's opportunities to get training and support and just build a community. So I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I appreciate everyone out there who is demanding a space and an equal space at the table. I'm so impressed with my disability advocates out there, and for those of us like me who are in the workspace trying to help workplaces be more human centric. Kudos to you. Keep up the good work.
Right on. Well, thanks a million for joining us today. And I think we're all walking away with a lot more knowledge. And for me, a lot more curiosity about, how can we make this a more inclusive workplace for those with disabilities. So thank you so much for this. Keep fighting that fight.
Thank you.
All right. Until we meet again, make change your friend. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode.